Hey guys, welcome to Creative Place Podcast. Today I'm here with Dino Ninassi. He is a commercial manufacturer's rep with some amazing furniture lines and also acoustical products. We are going to dive into all kinds of acoustic conversation today, and hopefully you can walk away with some great ideas for solutions for your space too. Hey Dino, thanks
Mm.
for joining me. I'm really glad to have you here. We've been working together for quite a while, and I really appreciate the partnership that we've had on products and furniture. And you are just one of the best reps out there in terms of customer service.
Thank you.
So I appreciate that. You also, in addition to other things, are very passionate about acoustics. So
Mm.
I'm looking forward to talking about that today. I know some people tuning in might think, oh, what's the big deal? Or, oh, goodness, this is going to get technical. And I assure you it will be. Definitely, we're going to get into some technical
Yes.
things. But I want to start off with just a little bit about you, kind of brought you to where you are in this journey.
Mhm.
And also what has gotten you, so passionate about acoustics.
Right.
And would just like to hear a little bit about that story and that perspective.
Sure. What really brought me into the journey is being in the industry, right? If you're always on top of what is trending in the industry, right? A good rep will pivot and follow those trends because you are a resource, or hopefully you are a resource to the A&D community. And that's what really stokes my fire, right, per se, because I want to be that resource. And acoustics, pre-COVID was already trending pretty high, but post-COVID, it just took off, and acoustics is something that is top of mind in everyone's. And if it's not in everyone's top of mind, it should be. And that's really what drives my passion, right? Because it's something that I can wrap my head around and bring information that's important to the project, right? I like being a part of that project team. And I think acoustics is a topic that everybody should be heavily considering.
I absolutely agree. And we have done several acoustics projects, different solutions, different clients, it's all very tailored to what their needs are. And I think what I appreciate most about what you bring to the role of educating us, whether it's, our clients or other end users, everyone in the industry, other designers, and firms, I think is that because you're passionate, you also see a lot of the other aspects of acoustics, which is beyond just, solving one problem or another. It also adds to a sense of belonging. It also adds a sense of, I've been heard, no pun intended, and that if I have, issues in this space or I'm not feeling great in this space because of the noise levels, acoustics can help that, or at least, coming after, some solutions to really
Right.
do that. So just tell me a little bit more about your theory behind challenging the norm, and also what it looks like, to affect the sense of belonging and culture that maybe some people don't realize.
Exactly. And I go back again, and you might hear me say it a couple of times, is that pre-COVID, right, acoustics played a role, but not as significant as it was post-COVID. And post-COVID, I was reading a white paper that post-COVID, our brains literally got rewired. We were in a very comfortable zone. We got used to that. Sometimes, if you have children, it might be loud, but now you're being asked to come back to the office, or you're going into, say, restaurants or a hotel, and all of a sudden your hearing senses have heightened.
Yes.
Right? Because our brains were rewired, for lack of a better word. And now that noise becomes, for some people, and I've heard this over and over, it becomes overwhelming.
Right.
right? It becomes a trigger point for somebody, or it becomes a point to where I can't focus, right? So acoustics is really coming into an area that it's more about not only a good sound environment, but health. Right?
Yes.
It becomes now a topic of health and how I feel. Can this space make me feel good about
Your whole well-being.
right? Well-being is the perfect word to use, and so acoustics has really become top of topic. I mean, a good example is the top NASDAQ 500 companies, right? Your Googles, your Amazons of the world. They've prioritized acoustics as one or two in their priority list when they're constructing an office or renovating an office. So those people must be recognizing that, look, acoustics plays an important role in the whole overall well-being of that person.
Yeah.
Right.
The whole
So
ecosystem of
yes.
if you will. And
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned because it's true, because we went through the pandemic. I mean, and that's, let's face it, that was a global trauma that people, had to experience. And, the rewiring is real. And
Yes.
so we're being rewired, in a certain way. And now, like you said, the acoustics make a big difference in that. We're rewired, to find this solace and, this comfort in our homes or wherever we were. And that is, now that transcends into the office in such a way that, maybe I don't feel as safe anymore. I don't feel that I have the privacy that I need. I don't
Right.
feel that I can do the heads down work. I can be productive. So there's so many things. And, through all of this, not necessarily in alignment with what happened, in that pandemic, but also there's so much more awareness of folks with neurodiversity and other, mental, physical, emotional
Exactly.
things that are going on. And a lot of it was because of the pandemic, but a lot of it is just coming more to light, these last few years,
Yeah.
which is awesome. And I think acoustics, temperature too, a little bit, that's another topic.
Yeah.
Acoustics, I think, are one of the biggest things that, the neurodiverse community finds most offensive, to be honest. And so we have to take care of everyone, including folks that really have some issues with that.
Exactly. And I think design, not in a on purpose or in a very bad way. Design, the way we're designing today is almost at fault for the way.
I cannot deny this.
No, and I'm, again, it's not in a bad way. I just because I love today's design.
Yes.
Hard floors, hard ceilings, open spaces. We're right,
Everything.
right. So that attributes even more to the problem of acoustics, right?
Absolutely.
So
Just, slap down some carpet and some wall covering and acoustic ceiling and call it a day.
Right.
So now we actually have to do a little extra work to make sure that we're addressing those issues.
exactly.
Which I think is a perfect segue because you follow this ABC framework.
Yes.
And I want to talk about that. What are these ABCs that you're talking about? How do they help us determine what our issues are and how
Right.
we go about solving, some of those challenges?
Yeah.
And I think it'd be helpful for anyone to know, even just where to get started. So what does that look like? Tell us what ABC is.
Well, ABC is the most how can I simplistic way to address acoustics in a space.
Yes.
And those letters mean something. A, absorb. B, block, and C, cover, right? So as I would consider myself an acoustical professional, right? When I'm asked, or if we're looking at a space, right, on how we're going to address the acoustics in that space, we turn to the ABCs, right? Okay, what is going on in that space? What is the function going to be in that space? What are people doing in that space? And believe it or not, different environments require different letters, right? Not all of them are going to be A's. Some of them might require C's, right? And I'll give you two quick examples. The first example is in a workspace, right? In a workspace where you got so much diversity now going on within a workspace. You got Zoom calls over here. You got a meeting of collaboration and inspiration going on over here. And in this corner, you got some really sensitive HR information, right? Well, all of those environments are going to require different letterings. They're not all going to require the A, the B, and the C. And I'll use, for example, the sensitive information, right? Where in HR, you don't want whatever's being discussed in that office leaking out to people out into the main, right? In that situation, we're going to want to cover that so people outside can't listen in on what's going on. However, maybe in a collaboration space, there's a lot of transfer noise from the other open offices coming into that, and it's reverberating like it being in a restaurant, for example.
Right.
And then there you're going to want to absorb the sound. You want to tone down that noise. And that kind of segues me into a restaurant. If we've all been to those restaurants where it is just so loud that all you want to do is just eat and get out of there, right?
Forget conversation.
Right. Yep.
Shout at you.
Exactly. And that's a situation where you're going to want to absorb sound. You want to tone it down.
Right.
So as you can see, the ABCs are totally different. I don't just come in and say, well, let's just slap acoustical panels all over the wall. And some in the A&D industry tend to just say, okay, we're just going. Well, you're not really solving the problem. You might be exacerbating the problem sometimes, So yes, that is kind of the ABCs of acoustics. It's just a simplistic way to address that challenge within that space.
I love that. And I think it makes it, relatable. I mean, people who have some of these issues, at least they know where to start.
Right.
They can either work with someone like you or an acoustic designer,
Right.
or, just, in doing a lot of the research, there's ways that, you can find some of those solutions. But I love the framework that you give that, and it makes it a little bit easier to understand and know what you're looking for, because like you said, it's different solutions for each
situation.
This space that we're sitting in right now, this is, we can critique this one too, but I think, the point is finding the language that allows you to have that conversation about where we go from here, right? I think
exactly. The appropriate solution for each one, for each situation. And there is an appropriate solution for each situation.
And it could be combos of.
I've done them. Yes.
It's important to know that.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure that we have a link to find you guys, in the show notes and all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they will have access, to maybe some of this additional material.
Oh yeah, most certainly.
You do a great presentation and CEU on that. So I'd be glad, to have our audience be able to take a look at that. And so, that does kind of bring me to, and you talked about a little bit, you started to touch on that, as those hybrid workspaces. So it's not just, there's sort of this hybrid setup, different, functions, but it's also, us being hybrid in our schedules and working from home, working from third places. So, knowing that those are all now, more and more prevalent, what are you finding are the biggest challenges? We're talking about these A, B's, and C's. Any of these things that you just mentioned, what are you finding are companies' biggest challenges right now? Is it that mixed, kind of environment, or is there something else that's going on that, finding your clients need that maybe people aren't tuning into?
No, again, very good question. I think part of the challenge for any ownership, right, is saying, okay, we got all these different spaces and they're all doing different things. And even from a designer standpoint, right, if you haven't been to one of my classes or have an acoustical background, how do you address? Because again, the go-to solution is let's just slap acoustical ceiling tiles and that'll fix it.
Yes.
And again, it's not, because you think about it.
Or even baffles. Because everybody loves baffles.
Everybody loves baffles. We'll slap baffles up there and it'll fix the problem. Well, so the biggest challenge I think ownership has is, how do we address all these different environments? How do we keep everybody happy? Because normally it says, well, somebody's going to have to suffer because we can't make everybody happy. Well, in acoustics, you can, right? You can get your environment to that level that everybody can really function and be happy with how the environment is shaped up, right?
Exactly. I appreciate that. Those challenges, because they are so impactful, and can be impactful on the business and how they function. What are some big wins that you've seen in that? We're talking about challenges. So yes, they have the challenges. They need to figure out what that is. But I know you've worked with plenty of clients now that you've been able to have those, those conversations.
Exactly.
And those solutions.
Exactly.
What's an example of a big win that you've had recently?
And this one really sticks in my mind because it showed what good acoustics can do. And this is the Wounded Warrior headquarters in Jacksonville, right? They approached the manufacturer I represent, and they brought the challenge that they have a call center, which it is a call center, right? So if you imagine, if I could draw you a picture, it's a empty warehouse based, right, scenario, and you got nothing but hundreds of desks lining up in this warehouse floor.
Stereotypical call center.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay.
So
crazy noise.
Yes, really, because you think about it, you got people that start raising their voices because my neighbor is talking louder. Now I'm going to try to be able to communicate, or I feel for me to communicate better, I got to speak louder than the background noise. So it just exacerbates the situation, and all of a sudden it's just nothing but noise. So the situation or the challenge there was not only internally, employee-wise, how do we feel comfortable and how do we address people not yelling, but there was another side to that whole scenario, and that was what this call center does is address challenges that soldiers are having. If they're having a tough time that day, right, they can call in and have somebody to talk them through this situation, right? Well, the problem with the bad acoustics, it not only was the employees having the challenge, but those soldiers calling in, right? They have faced so many different things that some of them start wondering, okay, are you listening? The noise background doesn't help the situation, right? So
Are you hearing me? Are you listening?
Are you
distracted by what you got going on?
The background noise, they start to already pull themselves away because it becomes a non-trusting environment, right? Because they want just a one-on-one. What they're sharing with that person is very personal. They don't want to feel like everybody else is hearing what they're saying. So that was the challenge, right? And in this case, we came up with the solution of using sound masking, covering the sound, to be able to mask the sound. And I'm not going to get into the whole technical side of things, but basically the solution there was sound masking, not using absorptive materials. We could have easily said, oh, let's throw baffles or acoustical panels. That actually would have exacerbated the situation. In this particular case, sound masking solved the problem. And to this day, they can't thank us enough. And they're so happy that they've come to a solution, because not only did it help the employees, now it's also helping the people they're helping, right? So
for people that don't understand exactly what sound masking does, it's not just the air conditioning sound that you
Right.
hear on the speakers. Let's stop and just talk about that for just a minute. And,
Right.
just describe, what that does. Because I know, because I've experienced it, and can be super helpful.
Yes.
But if you would just explain kind of what the theory is behind that.
Sound masking, yeah. No, and I'm glad you're bringing this up because everybody's familiar with the absorptive materials, the acoustical panels, the baffles. Everybody knows that product.
Theater.
Yeah. But sound masking is a little different. Sound masking, what it does is it covers well, when I say cover, it's not going to eliminate the sound, right? But it's going to muffle the sound. And for those people that have ever watched Charlie Brown's teacher talk, right? That's what you're going to hear. And you're saying, well, I'm still hearing noise. Yes and no. Our brains, again, I go back to our brains are wired that if I can't understand a conversation, if it's not clear of what is being said, I tune you out.
Yeah, most people do.
Right? So once I've tuned you out, whatever that is being said becomes a non-issue, right? And I always use the HR example. If the sensitive information being said within the HR office, right? You don't want that leaking out into the main area. People would think, well, I need to put the speaker in that office. No, you want to put the speaker where the problem is, right? Where you don't want people to hear. So we put the speakers on the outside. So when those people sitting outside that office are hearing anything, it's going to be so muffled that eventually they tune it away and it becomes a non-issue. And to add to that is that human beings can hear clearly two conversations at the simultaneously 60 feet away.
That's impressive.
Right? Oh yeah, we're all superhumans, right? And sound masking helps to limit that, especially even in the immediate circle of where you're having conversations. Think about a call center. I got somebody right behind me, in front of me, and to the side of me, and sound masking can even help in those dire situations.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I think some people are still kind of, unsure of what that actually does.
Let me add, when done properly.
Yes.
Because I've had people say, well, I can go buy a white noise speaker from Amazon. Yeah, you can do that, but it's not going to really address the overall problem, right? And there's fine tuning to be done, and it's a commercial grade, So yeah, I tell people if that's the route you want to go, please. I don't want to discourage you from that. All I can do is give you the information for you to make an informed decision, right? So
but I'm allowed to say it doesn't work.
Right.
We've tried it. We tried it in our own studio. I'm here to tell you it doesn't work. It just makes some weird sound and
yes,
kind of masks a little bit. But
yes, yeah,
absolutely. You have to get that done early on, which actually
perfect.
To
yes.
When we bring in acoustics, and this is an issue, furniture too, because you also have furniture lines. The issue with bringing you in too late is that, you don't have the budget to do the right things. And so, we talked about this, bringing you in at the beginning, maybe this is right after schematics,
right,
into design development, DD. And it's important that you're partnered with us, just like everybody else at the table, because why?
Well, a very, very good point is because early on, we can help address the situation or the challenges in each of those spaces, right? Because once we get beyond that and it lands in the GC, unfortunately, and I've seen it happen too often, is acoustics is one of the first things that gets VE'd out when really it didn't need to get VE'd out, right? And when I say that, I want to kind of clarify because yes, you got acoustical ceiling tiles and those, you see them everywhere, but I think designers want to move beyond those acoustical ceiling tiles and create more of a high design vision of that space, right? So if you bring us in early on during the schematic, right after the schematic design development, we can help you and your client walk through each challenge and address them early on, provide budgets early on, so everybody's aware of where this is going to fall. And if budget becomes an issue, we can then make adjustments, right, based on what those budgets are to help the situation. Now, I will say this to you is that a lot of people come back and say, well, it's too expensive. Well, yes, it might be, but are you going to take the chance of moving everybody in and finding out that you really have a more serious problem than money, right?
Because retrofitting is definitely going to be more expensive.
Oh, I tell people if I have to retrofit, if everybody's already in the office, it's going to cost 145% more for me, because now I'm probably going to have to come in and do it on a weekend. Not to disrupt. There's furniture. There's ceilings already installed that I have to do things to. So yes, it's much better to have the conversation early and see if you can reach a middle ground. And when I say middle ground, people say, well, this is my budget, and I'm just using a number, 10 grand. Well, 10 grand isn't going to solve the problem.
Right. No.
So I would rather walk away, because rather than just take your money and say, yeah, here it is, we know ahead of time it's not, because we can provide what that minimum is and what the optimal point is. Yeah. If you go below our minimum requirement, you're just throwing money at bad.
It doesn't make any sense, right? And this is, I think, a critical part of the conversation, just for business owners, leaders, for designers too, because when you're designing it, like you're saying, you're designing it as part of the overarching concept. It doesn't have to be this additional budget. It doesn't have to be this separate line item. It should absolutely be part of the design from day one. It should feel like an afterthought. And so, we try to do that very much so at Create & Co. And that's why we have a great relationship with you. We bring you in early. We talk about the spaces. It could actually save you money, dare say, because, the designer designing without thought of what those acoustic, solutions need to be could be applying things that don't need to be there. Or could be specifying materials slightly differently in order to, take care of some of these things off the bat. And then, there are the very specific acoustic solutions that you bring along that, again, need to be part of that design concept. Right. It needs to be specified from the beginning. If we don't get it in there, then it is going to be out of the budget. If you're not putting it in the design, exactly, it's not going to be. So,
and as a matter of fact, you make a good point there too, because we're working with your team right now on a project, and we came in very early on, and with your team, we're sorting through what can be done. We provide mock-ups because it's important, because not only do I need to help you, you then in turn have to sell it to your client. And the more information we can share and how it's going to benefit the space, the better you're off to be able to tell that story to your client, and so they have a good understanding, because I can understand pulling out a checkbook is never easy, right?
Especially after you've already struck many checks.
Yes.
You were done.
Yes. So.
I love this. We could probably talk about another 30 minutes. But to wrap us up, is there anything that we haven't thought about, haven't had a chance to talk about, anything that you just, like, I hate when this happens over and over and over again. Please save yourselves and don't do it. Or, is there any just little nugget that you would like to leave us with?
No, I think we've covered everything about what, if you bring us in early, it's very helpful. What the challenge that we have once the space has been developed is, it becomes a little too late. So it becomes very challenging for us to try to solve the problem. And even aside from that, it's a disservice to the end user. Yeah. Because now he's probably going to have to pay more when he really didn't have to pay more if you just take the time. And I know everybody's working at the speed of light nowadays, but if you're able to make us part of that team, we make your lives so much easier. And that's one thing you can forget about.
So thank you so much for being here. I think this was a great conversation. Got a little technical. We talked a little bit about culture. We talked about people. So we really hit all the buttons that I wanted to make sure we hit. And I really appreciate you having this conversation with me and for being such a great resource to me and my firm.
You're welcome. And thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Hey guys, thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation I had with Dino. And if you want some more information about acoustic solutions, I'm going to include information in the show notes how you can get in touch with Dino and find some more of those resources. And don't forget to like, share, and leave us some comments. I really want to know if you guys are out there creating a place also where we can live, work, and thrive.